what many people don't realize is that there are many different styles of yoga. So, I was trained primarily in a style known as vinyasa. Vinyasa means flow. And this style is typically associated with what's known as power yoga. This higher intensity power yoga style shows up in my level 3 and level 3 plus workouts. I typically adapt this style to what's often referred to as slow flow for my level 1 and level 2 workouts. So I guess what I really want you to know is that you have options with yoga. Give yourself some time and permission to experiment with different styles until you find one that really works for you. Yoga is all about respecting where your body is currently at and gently pushing your comfort zones. It's extremely important that you give yourself permission to make your workout be what you need it to be on any given day. And that starts with giving yourself permission to take a break at any point. I'm going to let you in on some simple secrets for tailoring your yoga workout, but before we get to that, let's begin with breathing. So I'm going to ask you to find a seated position that's comfortable for you. That could be on the floor, on a blanket, you could be sitting on the couch or on a chair. And once you find that position, straighten your posture as much as you can and close your eyes. The breathing we do in yoga is known as the Ujjayi breath. And the Ujjayi breath is awesome because not only does it help you get a lot of oxygen circulating, which does amazing things for your body, including help you decrease stress, but it also gets air moving within your sinus cavity, which can be really helpful in regards to detox and immunity. So with that being said, we're going to practice this Ujjayi breath, and it sounds almost like an ocean wave. Another way to describe it would be like you're taking a big sigh, but you're doing that with your mouth closed. So this is an inhale and an exhale through your nose. So at this point, once again with your eyes closed, your posture strong, just start inhaling and exhaling slowly through your nose. Your face is relaxed. And with each breath, try to lengthen your inhale and lengthen your exhale. Then start to think about slightly constricting the back of your throat. And imagine yourself on the beach. The breath might be audible now, meaning that if there is a person next to you, they could probably hear it. And once again, it sounds like an ocean wave. If the thought of constricting the back of your throat or the ocean wave isn't working for you, then take a few open mouth exhales. And then try that same sighing sort of breathing pattern with your mouth closed. Just take a few moments to experiment with this Ujjayi breath. And as you continue to practice this Ujjayi breath, I want to insert a few comments here. A lot of people, when they first begin yoga, find that the breathing is actually one of the most challenging things for them. Because I think we automatically assume, well, this is just breathing, so it should be easy. And the reality is, many of us aren't that aware of our breath on a regular basis. So it takes some practice to bring some awareness to it. So with that being said, just give yourself time to learn this. Don't beat yourself up about it. You're not going to be able to do perfect breathing throughout your entire practice all the time, certainly not at the beginning. So the key is just to notice when you're holding your breath throughout a yoga practice and to try to start the breathing process again. It's also important to do your best to pair your movement with your breath. And the more you do it, the easier it will become. So once again, give yourself time to learn it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's all about practice. So with that being said, let's take 3 more Ujjayi breaths together. Big inhale through your nose. Exhale through your nose. Ocean wave. Inhale through your nose, slight constriction of the back of your throat. Exhale through your nose. One more time. Very nice. Gently blink your eyes open. Very nice. Now, another thing that's important to address at the onset of a yoga practice is the idea of setting an intention. So I often, within my yoga videos, prompt you to set an intention if that resonates with you. And you'll notice that if you go to a lot of other yoga classes at studios or fitness centers, that they might do the same. And I get a lot of questions about what that actually means. And really, it's as simple as getting clear with yourself about what you want to get out of your time on the mat. So if there's a particular thing about your body or alignment that you want to focus on, that could be your intention. If it's more of a psychological thing, maybe you want to practice some gratitude, that could be your intention. Some people like to use their yoga practice almost as like a moving prayer, and they like to dedicate their practice to someone. That could be a part of your intention. So it's really up to you. And if it's something that doesn't resonate with you, you can simply ignore that part. Make sense? So let's go through a few foundational poses that show up typically over and over again within most yoga practices. And I think if you can wrap your head around these foundational poses, your confidence on the mat is really going to soar. So what I would encourage you to do is try to follow along as best you can, almost like we're doing an actual workout together. I'm just going to be adding a little more explanation than usual. Okay? Let's get started. We're going to begin with the position known as child's pose. To get into child's pose, you're going to come on your knees. Now, if you have any knee issues, you might find that it's more comfortable to do this pose with blankets or towels underneath for a little extra padding. Another option, too, is to bring pillows right here behind your thighs, because what that does is it doesn't allow your knee to flex quite as much. So if you have knee issues, sometimes if you have a big flex like this, that can cause pain. So once again, putting pillows here can help. If your knees don't like this pose at all, regardless of what you do, then instead of doing this pose, you can lie on your back, pull your knees into your chest, and you get the same benefits without the pressure on that joint. If your knees are all good though, then come into a kneeling position. You can do child's pose with your knees together or opened as far as mat width apart. I would suggest you start mat width apart to begin with. And regardless of the position of your knees, make sure your big toes are together to touch. Then from this position, you bring your forehead down towards the ground. Now, if your forehead doesn't reach the mat, then you can stack your fists and bring your forehead to your fists. If your forehead does reach the mat, then bring it there. Extend your arms out in front of you. Take a few deep breaths in child's pose. This is a beautiful position to help ground and focus you, calm you down. It's also a great one to release and relax your lower back. Now you can do a lot of different things with your arms. You might find it feels better to have your arms behind you with your palms up. If that's the case, go ahead and do that. Maybe you want your arms extended in front of you with your palms up. That's great too. So take a moment or two here to experiment with your arms. Then take 3 Ujjayi breaths in
in child's pose. Inhale through your nose and exhale through your nose like an ocean wave. Once you've finished those 3 breaths, use your next inhale to slowly roll up. And from child's pose, we're going to come to a standing position into what's called Tadasana. Tadasana means mountain pose. And basically mountain pose is just standing with strong posture. But I'm going to break this apart a little bit because this is an extremely important pose. When you feel comfortable with this pose, then you'll notice that all the other poses become much simpler because aspects of Tadasana, mountain pose, show up in all other yoga poses. So let's take a few minutes here to break this apart a bit. We're going to begin with our foundation. So in yoga, you always want to pay attention, and actually really in any exercise, but since we're speaking specifically about yoga, you always want to pay attention to what's in contact with the mat and make sure that that's in alignment first, because that's your foundation. So that's going to be our feet. And what we want here is our feet right under our hip bones, and we want the sides of our feet to be parallel. So a lot of times we get in the habit of standing goofy like this. Our feet are either too narrow or too wide, and we don't have the proper alignment. And that can wreak havoc on the rest of our body because then everything gets out of alignment here. So make sure that not only when you're in yoga, but just when you're standing in line or washing dishes, that you get your feet in the proper placement. Now once that's intact, we're going to move up our body and focus on our inner thighs. I want you to pretend like you have a small ball or a yoga block between your inner thighs and you're gently squeezing that apparatus. What we want to feel is inner thigh engagement, because when our inner thighs are engaged, that helps us activate our core and takes pressure off our lower back. So the more we can activate and strengthen our inner thighs, the better our body's going to feel. Moving on up, we're going to pay attention to what's going on here with our rib cage and our pelvis. I'm going to turn to the side so you can see something. I have a really big curve in my lower back, which you may be able to see here. And so before I was introduced to what's known in yoga as Uddiyana Bandha, whenever you hear the word bandha, that always means lock. Uddiyana Bandha is your rib cage to pelvic lock. Before I was introduced to that, I actually threw my lower back out multiple times during a yoga practice. Once I learned about Uddiyana Bandha, however, I have never since thrown my back out. So this is a really important piece to pay attention to. So right here, I don't have the lock in place. I've got a really big lower back curve. In order to get that lock in place, I have to drop my tailbone and adjust the position of my pelvis. So you can see the difference. Here it's not in place. Here I'm locked up. So in almost every single yoga pose, whether you're on the mat, you're standing, you're balancing, doesn't matter. Even when you're stretching, it's important to have Uddiyana Bandha, your rib cage to pelvic lock in place in order to keep your lower back safe. So working our way up our body, now we're going to make sure our chest is open. A lot of what we do in our everyday life is in front of us. We drive, we cook, we are on the computer, and if we're not mindful, what happens is the muscles in our chest, known as our pectoral muscles, get really tight and very aggravated. And then our upper back muscles, the space between our shoulder blades, those muscles get long and aggravated. And in order to balance that all out and decrease pain, decrease aggravation, we want to open up. So whenever you're doing yoga, you want to make sure your shoulders are pulling back and down. We want to create as much space between our shoulders and our ears as possible. That's not only going to allow our upper body to relax and release, but also when our shoulders are down, that helps our core fire up. So in other words, if our shoulders are up here in any pose, it's really hard for our abdominal muscles to engage in a way that really supports us. So once again, the more space you can create between your shoulders and your ears in Tadasana and in pretty much any yoga posture, the better it's going to feel and the safer it's going to be. Finally, we want to make sure the back of our neck is long. So instead of having our chin jut out and our ears forward, we want to see if we can back it up a little bit. Ears ideally over our shoulder, chin tucked just slightly so that the crown of our head is pulling towards the ceiling. And when you're standing in Tadasana pose, we want to make sure not to lock our joints, but instead have a little micro bend in places like our knees to keep our joints safe. So instead of having really rigid posture, we're just holding ourselves almost like with a sense of dignity. And I always like to, if I'm just standing in line or something like that, to gently open my palms. That helps me just automatically get my upper body in a proper position. It's also just a nice prompt for me to get into my strong Tadasana posture. So once again, when you get the aspects of Tadasana really solid within you, then not only do you know how to hold yourself in a functional way, which is going to help you decrease pain, but you also are going to find that these aspects show up throughout our yoga practice in many different poses. We're going to move forward from here into what's called a half vinyasa. So bring your hands to heart center, meaning just right here by your chest. We're going to do 2 different versions of a half vinyasa today. Begin on your next inhale by bringing your arms up into high prayer. On an exhale, fold forward through the center of your body. On your next inhale, do what's called a halfway lift, meaning you extend yourself out parallel with the ground. Exhale, fold. Soften your knees. Inhale, stand high prayer. And this time on your exhale, swan dive forward. So you pull your chest forward. You're hinging this time. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, fold. Soft knees. Inhale, stand. Pull your belly button to your spine as you come up. And on an exhale, pull your hands into heart center. A half vinyasa is often used to almost clear our palate when we're doing certain sequences in yoga, specifically in like a slow flow practice. A half vinyasa is used to in between different sequences. So from here, we're going to work our way down to the mat, and I'm going to show you a full vinyasa, which is commonly used in a more power vinyasa type class, so a little more intense version of what we just did. So hands at heart center. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, fold forward either through heart center or swan dive. And we're going to hang out in this forward fold for a second before we move into the full vinyasa, because I want to show you a couple things about forward folds. First and foremost, you always have the choice of whether you want your legs to be straight in a forward fold or bent. If your legs are bent, that's going to help release your lower back. If your legs are straight, that's going to help with flexibility in your calves and your hamstrings. So in other words, one is not better than the other. They just have different intentions. Another thing you want to pay attention to in a forward fold is where your body weight lands in your feet. So oftentimes what happens is we start to roll back into our heels. Instead of doing that, we want to try to bring our body weight forward. This is going to help you get the most out of your pose. Finally, in a forward fold, it's really easy, regardless of what arm position you may be in, to let your shoulders fall towards your ears. Now, this might seem counterintuitive, but in this position, you want your shoulders to actually pull up. Because remember, just like what we talked about in Tadasana, regardless of the pose we're doing, we want to create a lot of space between our shoulders and our ears. So although that may seem counterintuitive, you'll notice that it actually feels better once you do it. So take one more breath in your forward fold. And then once you've finished that breath, take an inhale and do a halfway lift
On your exhale, bend your knees, plant your hands, step back to a high plank, and then drop to your knees. So let's talk about high plank a little bit. First and foremost, if you have any wrist issues, try making a fist like this. Another option is to come down onto your forearms. So those are two things to keep in mind if your wrists are bothering you. If you do want to plant yourself on your palms, you want to make sure you have really bright fingers so you give your wrists and your shoulders a really solid base to work with. You want your pointer fingers always to be going straight forward, shoulder width apart. So with that in place, we have our shoulders over our hands, but away from our ears. Belly button is up, so we're in Uddiyana Bandha. So notice how all these things are continually showing up. If I wasn't in Uddiyana Bandha, my posture would look more like this. Uddiyana Bandha locks me up and protects my lower back. So this is a modified full vinyasa. We're in a plank on our knees. On your next exhale, do what's called chaturanga, meaning you're bringing yourself down into almost like a push-up position, but notice how my elbows are scraping my rib cage. So elbows stay in. In this version, I come all the way down to my belly. Then I float my hands and do what's called cobra on an inhale, meaning my elbows and my shoulder blades pull together and down towards my hips. Then on an exhale, push back to child's pose. That one will look familiar. Let's do that again. On your next inhale, come forward to high plank on your knees. Check out your form for a moment. Shoulders over your hands, Uddiyana Bandha. Then on your next exhale, chaturanga. Elbows scrape your rib cage, belly button all the way down to the mat. Inhale, cobra, float your hands, shoulder blades pull together. And on an exhale, find child's pose. So we've done a half vinyasa. We've done a modified full vinyasa. And now we're going to do the unmodified version. So a little bit more intense. And once again, regardless of the versions, these vinyasas are just used to flow from one sequence to the next, almost like we're clearing our palate. So if you want to try the full vinyasa, come forward on your next inhale into high plank. This time you're coming up onto your toes. And when we're in high plank, an interesting thing to notice is pretty much we're in the same Tadasana position, but now we're just flipped on our side. So everything we talked about in Tadasana standing is going to mostly apply here in the plank position. So scan your body from your feet all the way to the crown of your head and see if you can make some adjustments so you feel really strong and in proper alignment. Then from this position, you're going to do a chaturanga without dropping to your knees or bringing your belly button to the ground. Looks like this. Exhale down. Instead of coming up to cobra, you come up to up dog. So your knees are off the ground, shoulders are pulling back and down. You can look down at the ground or up at the ceiling, whatever feels best on your neck. And then from here, you use an exhale to push back to downward facing dog. Now we're going to go over down dog in a second. But before we do, let me address a couple of things. First and foremost, with this full vinyasa, most people get really confused about what happens with their feet. So let me show you how to move your feet so that's not confusing for you anymore. On your next inhale, come forward to high plank. Notice here that my toes are tucked under. On an exhale, down to chaturanga, still tucked under. Now from here, we're going to flip them. Flip, flip. Now I'm on the top of my feet. Flip again to go back to down dog. So your first option is flipping. The second option, which is a little more advanced, is rolling. So let me show you that one. Inhale to high plank. Exhale, chaturanga. Here I'm going to roll to the tops of my feet and then roll back once I get to down dog.
And let's talk about down dog here for a moment. You'll notice that with down dog, we are figuring out how far apart our feet and our hands should be depending on how long our plank is. So in other words, your hands and your feet shouldn't have to move when you go from plank to down dog. And if that's the case, then you know your feet and your hands are the proper distance apart. Now, if you're new to yoga, you might want to do down dog with a little wider base, meaning you bring your big toes out to the sides of your mat. This gives you a little extra support and takes some pressure off your upper body. You never want to bring your feet closer than hip width, so you don't want a really narrow base like this, but instead hip width apart, just like when we were in Tadasana, and toes going straight forward. You also want to make sure that when you're in this position, you're pushing primarily through your pointer fingers and your thumbs, little to no weight in your pinkies. That's going to take some pressure off your wrists. And if you're having a really hard time with your wrists, then you can always come down onto your forearms, and that's going to, once again, take the pressure off there. Now, when you're in downward facing dog, you want your elbow pits, this part of your body, to be facing out. So you're kind of almost doing a motion like this, even though you can't see it, it's pretty subtle, but that's going to help keep you in the proper position as well. And then everything we talked about in Tadasana is going to apply. So in other words, you're keeping yourself strong in Uddiyana Bandha, belly button pulling towards your spine, and keeping your neck long as well. So a lot of times in down dog, we want to look up. Instead of letting that happen, you want to try to keep your neck down unless you're prompted to look up as you're moving. Aside from that, though, your gaze is at your feet. And with downward facing dog, just like a forward fold, you can choose if you want your knees bent or your legs straight. One is not better than the other. It just depends on your intention. Knees bent will help release your lower back. Legs straight will help lengthen your hamstrings and your calves. So from here, if you haven't bent your knees already, do that now. Look up and use your next exhale to step, jump, walk, or crawl your feet towards your hands. So do whatever you need to do to get your feet here. On your next inhale, do a halfway lift. Lengthen out parallel with the ground. Shoulders to your hips, not your ears. Exhale, fold. Soften your knees. Inhale, stand. High prayer. Exhale, hands to heart center. Lovely. So from here, we're going to do a few standing poses beginning with crescent lunge. So in crescent lunge, what you want to think about is being in cross-country ski tracks with your feet. So in other words, both feet are pointed forward, but they're hip width apart. Let me show you what I mean. From the top of your mat, step back with your left leg, right leg forward. So here are my cross-country ski tracks. Hip bones are pointed straight forward as well. And we always, in crescent lunge, want our knee over our ankle. Back leg is straight, pushing through our back heel. Now, a few things here. Let's start with what's going on in our upper body. You can use your upper body to make things easier for you if that would be helpful. So in other words, you can bring your arms up to a T to help you balance. You can even grab a chair or place your hand on the wall if that would be helpful. You can bring your hands closer to your midline if you want a little bigger challenge balance-wise. This is going to be one of the most challenging positions with your upper body in crescent lunge. Step forward, shake it out. Let's do the same thing on the other side. Right leg back, left leg forward. Your hip width apart, toes are going straight forward. Now one thing I want to mention here is that you don't want to get too narrow because then you're going to feel really off balance. So if you're feeling really off balance, move your feet a little wider to give yourself a sturdier base. And then you want to pay attention to the length of your stance. So in other words, the longer I make this stance, the further apart my feet are lengthwise, the more intense this lunge becomes and the more challenging the pose will be. So you always can decide day in, day out how challenging you want it to be by how long your lunge is, by how long your length is. And also another trick, so to speak, when it comes to lunging poses like this, is if you need to take a break, all you have to do is straighten your front leg, take a breather, and then re-lunge when you're ready. Awesome. Step forward. Let's do a half vinyasa to clear our palate. Hands at heart center. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, swan dive, or bring your hands through heart center to fold. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, fold. Soft knees. Inhale, stand, high prayer. Exhale, hands to heart center. You're doing great. We're going to move to another one, another standing pose, I should say, known as Warrior One. Now, Warrior One and Crescent Lunge are exactly the same, except for what's going on with our back foot. So with Crescent Lunge, I'm going to go back with my right leg first. How about you do that too? Step back with your right leg. With Crescent Lunge, we were in cross-country ski tracks. Both sets of toes were pointed forward. With Warrior One, instead, you're going to angle your back foot at a 45-degree angle. And notice how my entire back foot is planted. That's what we want in Warrior One. Everything else is going to stay the same, though. Hip bones are squaring to the front. So in other words, back hip is driving forward, front hip is pulling back. Front knee is over your front ankle. Just like with Crescent Lunge, you can decide where your arms are depending on what you need. Lots of options here. You got Uddiyana Bandha. And something important to pay attention to with this one is pushing through the pinky toe side of your back foot. That's going to help you lengthen. Awesome. Let's try it on the other side. Step forward. Shake it out. And then step back with your left leg, right leg forward. You're planting your back foot. And with Warrior One, typically we have heel to heel alignment, meaning if I drew a line from my front heel all the way back, it would hit my back heel. So that means we have a pretty narrow base. If you need a wider base, go ahead and do that. That's just fine. So you're deciding on your width and your length. Front knee over your front ankle. Decide what you like to do with your arms. Push through the pinky toe side of your back foot. Drive your left hip bone forward. Pull your right hip back. So we're squaring our hips to the front in Warrior One. And then check in with those cues we use in Tadasana. How's your Uddiyana Bandha? What's going on with your shoulders and your neck? One more breath here. Awesome. Step forward. Shake it out. Half vinyasa. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, fold. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, fold. Soft knees. Inhale, stand. Exhale, hands to heart center. And we've got one more lunging type pose to go through now, known as Warrior Two. So in Warrior One, we look something like this. In Warrior Two, you're going to adjust your hips and your back foot. So it's going to look something like this instead. We have heel to arch alignment instead of heel to heel alignment, perpendicular feet, and now instead of our hips squaring to the front, we're trying to square them to the side. So let's get in this one together. Step back with your right leg, left leg forward. Once again, the longer your stance, the more intense the lunge will be. Front knee over your front ankle. For Warrior Two, arms float up parallel with the ground. Really bright fingers, just like when we were holding ourselves in a plank position. And you're gazing out through your front middle finger. Now with this one, you're going to want to always be gently pulling your back hip back. But as that happens, your knee might want to cave in. You never want that to happen. So always keep your knee open, and you'll know if it's in the right position if you can see your front big toe. Then with that stabilized, you can gently pull back, shoulders right over your hips. One more breath here. Step forward, shake it out. Same thing on the other side. Left leg back, right leg forward. Decide on your length. Perpendicular feet. Heel to arch alignment. Right knee bends over your right ankle. Arms float up. You can see your front big toe. Shoulders over your hips. Uddiyana Bandha. So if I didn't have Uddiyana Bandha, it might look something like that. Instead, I lock up. Deep breaths. If you need to take a break, straighten your front leg and re-lunge when you're ready. One more strong breath here. Excellent. Step forward. Shake it out. Half vinyasa. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, fold. Inhale, stand. Exhale, fold. And I want to show you one quick thing about getting into the warriors. And why don't I have you stand here? So bend your knees, rise to stand. Hands to heart center. And you can actually just watch me for this one if you want to. Because this is another question I get asked quite a bit is, how do I get into the warriors from downward facing dog? So in other words, we've been getting into the warriors and lunges by stepping back. Typically, that's how you get into them in a slow flow type practice. So in like my level 1 and 2 practices, it's a little bit easier than getting into them from down dog. When you get into them from down dog, instead of stepping back, now you're bringing your foot forward. So it looks something like this. Foot comes forward, and then you rise into the position. Now here's where people often have trouble with that. If you haven't practiced it a lot, then it's often that your foot gets stuck back here, which is kind of a bummer. But not a big deal at all, because all you have to do is grab your ankle, move your foot where you want it to be, and then you're good to go. Got it? Awesome. So we have a few more things to run through before I'm going to have you end in a short shavasana. And the next one is a little twisting. So I'm going to have you toe heel your feet out, just meaning you slowly move your feet to a little wider base. And notice when you have a wider base, you feel a bit more stable. So that's always something to keep in mind. If you're struggling with stability and balance, increasing the size of your base is certainly going to help. So from here, inhale, bring your arms up. Exhale, fold forward. Bend your knees so that you can get your hands to the ground, hang heavy. So here we are in a forward fold again. Just a different position, different way of doing it with a wider base. Remember that when you're in a forward fold, body weight comes forward, shoulders pull up. And we're going to do a twist here. Now before we get into the twist, I want to preface it with saying that we do a ton of twisting in yoga, and we do it in many different poses. However, the principles are always going to stay the same. And the secret of twisting is actually in your shoulder. So let's practice it here. Plant your left hand on the ground. Either your palm is on the ground or your fist. Remember, you can bend your knees as much as you need to in order to do this. Then bring your right hand to your right hip. Begin this twist with your right shoulder. So the top of your right shoulder pulls away from your ear, and then your shoulder blade pulls towards your spine. That is the secret of twisting. Regardless of the position, it's always initiated by your shoulder. So you're always twisting from the rib cage on up. Everything from the rib cage on down stays the same. On your next exhale, release to center. Same thing on the other side. Plant your right palm or fist. Body weight forward. Left hand to your left hip. Initiate the twist with your shoulder. This time your left shoulder blade pulling towards your spine. You can look over your left shoulder if that feels okay on your neck. If it doesn't, just look down at the ground. No worries. One more breath here. Release to center. Soft ease. Inhale, roll up nice and slow. Awesome. Bring yourself back to Tadasana, feet hip-width apart. We've got just 2 more things to run through, and then, like I said, we'll finish up with a short, lovely Shavasana. And the next thing I'd like to run through is what's often known as back bends in yoga. And the reason I really want to emphasize this in this 101 video is because this is where I typically would throw out my back if I wasn't mindful of Uddiyana Bandha, of that rib cage to pelvic lock. Because the secret about back bends in yoga is they're not intended for your lower back, they're intended for your upper back. So they're intended to open up in your pectoral muscles and strengthen and bring some blood flow to the space between your shoulder blades. So regardless of the position or the pose that is inviting you to do a back bend or a heart opener, as they're often called as well, you want to make sure you're locked up here. So we're going to do a standing heart opener, a relatively simple one. And I'm going to show you the difference between doing it safely and doing it incorrectly, which could cause some injuries. So let's start here in Tadasana. Find strong Uddiyana Bandha, meaning you're dropping your tailbone. If I once heard it described, and I really like this description, to pretend like you have a monkey tail and you're grabbing your monkey tail from this point and pulling it down. So that you're locked up in Uddiyana Bandha. Arms come up into a cactus-like position. And on your next exhale, pull your elbows back and down. So you can see how we're intending to open in our chest and strengthen in our upper back. Now let me show you what this would look like if I wasn't doing Uddiyana Bandha. My body would naturally go to this position, and my entire body would want to go forward instead of just my chest. So that's what you really want to pay attention to in heart openers, in back bends, is, am I locked up in Uddiyana Bandha? Make that your number one priority. Then from there, whatever range of motion you have, you can utilize. So let's try 2 more. Uddiyana Bandha. On an exhale, pull your elbows back and down. You can look up if that feels okay on your neck. Inhale, back to cactus arms. Exhale, pull. Awesome. Inhale up. And exhale, hands to heart center. The last thing we're going to chat about on this video is hip openers. So hip openers are a big part of yoga. You can open and loosen up your hips in many different ways. Typically, hip opening exercises or poses can be pretty uncomfortable, unfortunately. And what I want you to know is the discomfort in those poses typically means way more comfort when you're off the mat. So in other words, it's worth it if you can remember that there's 2 kinds of discomfort. There's true discomfort and there is pain. True discomfort always means that things are going to improve if you're willing to put up with it, if you're willing to put up with the aching, the pulling, the burning. The pain, however, means that it could make things worse if you continue. And you'll know if it's pain if your body is sending you shooting sensations, grinding, or cramping up. So that's kind of the difference. True discomfort that will help you shows up when you're feeling aching, burning, or pulling. Pain is going to be grinding pain, shooting pain, or cramping up. So keep that in mind specifically with hip openers. And with that being said, I'm going to show you what's called modified pigeon. This is a hip opener you want to do if you're in a yoga class and the hip opener that the teacher is showing you is just not working for you for whatever reason. So this is a great go-to one for almost anyone. For this hip opener, you're going to come down on the mat and you're going to come all the way to your back. Watch me here for a second because this is important. Whenever you come down to your back, you want your knees to be bent because that's going to help protect your lower back. Then from this position, come to your shoulder, roll around. To get into modified pigeon, bring your right ankle to your left thigh and gently flex this toe. And let your knee drop. You can even gently push it away if you'd like. If this is challenging for you, or in other words, you're already feeling the discomfort, you're welcome to stay just like this. If you need a bit more of a challenge, a bigger stretch, then you can bring this whole unit a little closer to you. You can even bring your foot up on a chair or a stability ball if you need a little extra support. Hands can wrap around your left thigh if that's available. And notice how I'm gently flexing my toes. That's going to be an important thing to keep in mind when you're doing intense stretches, specifically hip openers, is when you have a gentle flex of your toes, then your legs are gently engaged. So in other words, you're keeping yourself safe. So as you stretch, you keep a little engagement for safety purposes. One more breath here. Drop your left foot down if it was up. Switch sides. Left ankle to your right thigh. Gentle flex of your toes. Left knee drops. Stay just like this, or on an exhale, bring this whole unit up for a bigger stretch. See what's going on in your upper body. Shoulders down. Tuck your chin slightly towards your chest. Breathe deeply in intense stretches. It's going to help. Remind yourself that the discomfort now means more comfort later. Drop your right foot down. Very nice. And we're going to finish up our practice here in what's called Shavasana just for a few moments. Shavasana is also known as corpse pose or your final resting pose. It's a position that I used to skip quite a bit when I first started yoga. And now I never skip because I absolutely love it. But the whole point of Shavasana is allowing you to soak up the benefits of what you just did. So it's important to do it when you have a chance. So with that being said, with Shavasana, you can find this position with your feet planted wide and your knees tenting in, if that feels good on your lower back. Another great option is to extend your legs mat width apart and allow your pinky toes to fall towards the ground. Your arms are at about a 45-degree angle away from your body, palms up. And then, of course, shoulders are pulling down towards your hips versus up to your ears. Close your eyes if you haven't already. And enjoy Shavasana here for a few breaths. You're ready to come back to your body, wiggle your fingers and your toes. And roll to your side with your knees bent. Keeping your knees bent, gently push yourself up to a seated position. Whatever seated position works best for you is just fine. Strong posture, hands at heart center. In a yoga practice, you typically end with some sort of blessing. And today we're going to do that
I'll end eventually by saying namaste. And I get a lot of questions about what that means and what's appropriate to do when an instructor offers that greeting towards you or that blessing. So namaste to me means the good and the light within me recognizes and honors that same good and light within you. And when an instructor says it to you, you're welcome to say it back. If that doesn't feel comfortable though, there's no need to say it back. Only if it resonates. And if there's a different blessing you'd like to offer to yourself or others, that's just fine too. So we'll end our practice by bringing our hands to the space between our eyes. May you have peace in your thoughts today. Hands to your lips. May you have peace in your words. And hands to your heart. May you have peace in your heart and actions. Namaste.